Populist quiz. Did the endorsement of Donald Trump and JD Vance cost Viktor Orban the election in Hungary, or was it a pack of zebras? It's a trick question. It was both. Orban was kicked out after 16 years in power after a swirl of corruption and cronyism allegations. That's where the zebras come in. And it's a story about a leader who forgot what it took to be popular. That's where JD Vance comes in.
Viktor Orban is going to win the next election. I feel very confident about that.
While this is a pivotal moment for Hungary and its 9 million people, it also tells us something about far-right movements around the world, because Orban was the darling of populists and autocrats everywhere, and he had plenty of fans in the White House too.
I just want to let you know you have my total and complete endorsement.
In this FourSight, we're going to answer a few big questions. Why did Orban finally lose? What does it mean for MAGA and Donald Trump? And crucially, while some see this as a huge blow for leaders associated with far-right populism,
a tough day for Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu, Donald Trump.
We look at why this might not be the major victory some on the left claim it is. Viktor Orban described himself as the master of illiberal democracy. But what exactly does that mean? Basically, it's when a country, like Hungary, on the face of it, looks like a democracy. There are elections, there's a parliament, there are courts. But it's just set dressing for an autocrat to take centre stage.
They deny the basic tenets of liberal democracy.
He appointed loyalists to positions that were supposed to be held by independents.
That's Zsuzsanna and András. She is a former member of Orban's party, Fidesz, and he is one of Hungary's leading investigative journalists. And the illiberal system they're talking about is being followed pretty closely by Donald Trump and his administration.
I love Hungary and I love that Viktor. I'll tell you, he's a fantastic man.
Now look, Hungary and the United States are of course not the same. Their political systems, their parliaments, their constitutions are vastly different. But there are clear similarities between the playbook that Orban used and what Donald Trump is doing right now in his second term. And I think there are 4 key areas that show that best: justice, universities, the media, and elections themselves. So let's start with justice. During Orban's second term, he expanded the size of the Constitutional Court, the highest in the land, from 11 to 15 judges, and then changed the rules so that his party Fidesz could install loyalists. And they've done that across the court system.
The Hungarian state was captured by individuals of Orban loyalists who were sitting in the Constitution Court, in the judiciary, in the public prosecutor.
In America, President Trump has appointed 3 conservative Supreme Court judges who've helped legitimize his use of executive power, like giving presidents immunity from prosecution. And lower down the chain, immigration judges are being threatened if they don't deport enough people. Just the other week, the Trump administration fired 2 judges. And that specific case is connected to the second similarity I was talking about, universities. Those US judges who were fired, that was because they dropped the deportation cases of pro-Palestine students. The Trump administration has been piling pressure on American higher education, making threats to pull federal funding for universities they say aren't doing enough to stop anti-Semitism, as well as criticizing them for their diversity policies.
Very anti-Semitic when you take a look, whether it's Columbia, Harvard, Princeton.
It all follows Orban's tactic of putting pressure on institutions they see as far left.
State resources, institutions, cultural institutions, education, money, school books were changed.
Orban changed the rules so that he could make loyalists the trustees of major universities, and they banned master's programs in gender studies. And despite mass opposition, forced billionaire and champion of progressive causes George Soros to move his Central European University out of Hungary entirely. Then there's the media. Orban put party supporters in charge of Hungary's major public service providers, and he ensured loyalists bought up other private media outlets, meaning that Fidesz essentially controls 80% of the country's media. At the beginning of his 16-year stint in charge, the country was rated 23rd on the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index. By the end of Orban's reign, Hungary had slipped to 68th.
He has built a really powerful and gigantic propaganda machinery. It's really like North Korean style, Soviet style.
Yeah, because when I was in Hungary for the election, all the posters around Budapest and the rest of the country, they were all for Orban, and they were paid for by the government.
It's not just billboards, posters. More than 500 media outlets were put into one company and edited centrally.
And it's a tactic Trump's second administration has clearly learned from. Since the beginning of 2025, Trump has made multiple threats and brought lawsuits against numerous outlets around the world. Billionaire MAGA ally David Ellison bought Paramount and took control of CBS News, one of the outlets Trump had previously sued. Now, Ellison is trying to merge Paramount with Warner Brothers, which would give him control of a massive slice of America's news media. And there was widespread criticism of Trump's FCC head, Brendan Carr, seemingly gloating recently about how this administration is redrawing the media landscape in the US.
Look at the results so far. PBS defunded, NPR defunded, Colbert is leaving, CBS is under new ownership, and soon enough, CNN is going to have new ownership as well.
And then finally, elections. Hungary is still a democracy, technically, but Orban rewrote the rules. First, his party Fidesz redrew the electoral map, and they essentially changed the rules to make it easier for Orban to stay in power, which helped him secure super majorities in 2014 and 2018 with less than half the vote. Before Orban came to power in 2010, Fidesz, that's a group that rates democracies, they called Hungary a liberal democracy. But then, 9 years later, 2019, they said it had become the first member of the European Union to ever be downgraded to an electoral autocracy.
The road from democracy to dictatorship or autocracy, it's not like you open a door and then you leave democracy and you enter dictatorship. It's like it's a spectrum. It's a longer path. And Hungary was somewhere in between.
Over in the US, there are concerns that Trump is now leading his country down a similar road. Republican states have aggressively redistricted to try and give themselves more seats in Congress. The Democrats have responded in kind. And this administration is trying to take powers away from states to put the federal government in charge of elections, including Trump recently signing an executive order to completely rework mail-in ballots.
That's a big deal.
Critics say it would severely restrict access to voting and was immediately challenged by 23 Democratic states as unconstitutional. But if Orban created an illiberal system of cronyism and corruption, which some say is now being replicated in America, how did he manage to hold on to power for so long? Well, this is where another central tactic from Orban's playbook comes into focus: weaponizing immigration and nationalism. In the aftermath of huge waves of migration across the continent in 2015, Orban argued against allowing those people to settle in Hungary, distancing himself from the EU and constructing fences along the border. He said that mass migration would ruin and threaten European culture.
Aki a migrációt támogatja, az a terrorizmus is támogatja. Mi ellenezzük a terrorizmust, ezért nem támogatjuk a migrációt.
Orban was always good at finding targets he said were a fundamental threat to Hungary's sovereignty and strength. He didn't just attack migrants. He went after liberals, communists, LGBTQ people, the EU, and Ukraine.
For a long time, he was a master at building narratives, and this narrative was always structured along the lines of, okay, Hungary is under attack.
This is now a very essence of illiberalism, as we started our discussion, that politics is a war, and we are the good people, and we always have to have an enemy.
That playbook is being used so clearly now by other parties across Europe, and Orban's popularity among those European populists largely stems from how he mastered that anti-immigrant nationalist narrative for more than a decade.
Originally, Fidesz was a centrist liberal party, but Orban understood that from the middle he wouldn't go very far. Basically, what he did was that he could modernize Hungarian nationalism, which was based on victimhood, but what he added is national pride. So people started feeling not only be victims, but being super proud.
Making a country great again, playing on a sense of unfairness and victimhood. It's the rhetoric that Donald Trump has been using since he began his presidential campaign back in 2015.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States.
But while immigration was crucial for Orban in previous votes, and similarly helped Trump return to power, every election is different. Now look, many Hungarians that I spoke to on the campaign trail, they still credited Orban for limiting migration, including people who were going to vote for his opposition, Péter Magyar. But the thing is, immigration just wasn't the number one issue for voters anymore, and that's what might be the warning sign for MAGA. Because the big change in Hungary over the last few years was a worsening economic picture that completely shifted people's mindsets about the state of their country.
Orban was also lucky enough to have a pretty prosperous economy between 2014 and 2020 until COVID. People didn't really care so much maybe about corruption.
So all that alleged corruption finally became a key election issue, mainly because the economic situation really started to shift. In 2022, Russia invaded Ukraine, and the energy shock that followed sent inflation soaring across the EU. But Hungary stood out. By 2023, it recorded the highest inflation across the European Union, at nearly 3 times the EU average. After that spike, Hungary did manage to bring prices back under control, but the damage was done, and it never really recovered.
People could see the difference between their betterment and the cronies of Orban, so the distance just becomes so big.
The zebras as well.
Yes, the zebras, of course.
So what's the deal with those zebras? They were filmed on land owned by a wealthy friend of Viktor Orban, and next door is the luxurious property owned by none other than Orban's father. At the time, Hungary's leader said it was just a farm, but not everyone was convinced, and people at protests started dressing up as zebras. It became a symbol of anti-corruption.
Itt van puszta egy nagyon fontos jelkép, több mindent jelképez, leginkább a hazugságát.
And in the closing weeks of the most recent election, investigative journalists, those operating in the small space left for independent media, uncovered more allegations of corruption.
I think that was when it became clear to me that actually this system is actually collapsing.
Andrus's organisation, Direct36, revealed that Hungary's internal intelligence agency were pressuring police to investigate people working for Orban's political opponent, Péter Magyar. And then the floodgates really opened.
After that, almost every day, a new whistleblower, a new insider stepped forward. I guess it was kind of like a nightmare scenario for Orban and his party because they totally lost control of the narrative.
Orban always said that the state and the party were clearly separate. But Hungarians felt like Orban, who was meant to be this defender of their national interest, was now too focused on being an international populist, that he'd lost sight of the economy and domestic issues.
That's what Fidesz insiders told me years ago, that Orban just got bored of domestic politics.
He was not even interested in governing.
Which isn't a million miles away from the criticism Donald Trump is facing right now. Since he came into power, approval of Trump's handling of major issues has dropped in every category. This is happening alongside serious allegations of corruption and insider trading, which the White House has denied. And of course, Trump himself would not describe his movement as far-right. Republicans are already worried that Trump's lost touch with voters who aren't interested in what's going on in Hungary or foreign policy in general. They want the president to focus on the economy, which is exactly what Péter Magyar did.
Corruption was a major theme of Péter Magyar's campaign, but actually it was not the only message. He was focusing quite heavily on living standards, affordability, which is a new buzzword in American politics as well.
So the big question now then is, along with the future of Hungary, what does this mean for populism in Europe and the US? Judging by the streets of Budapest when the results were announced, it seems pretty clear that most Hungarians are excited and hopeful for the future. But the new Prime Minister, Péter Magyar, is no liberal darling. He's considered centre-right and is a former member of Orban's party Fidesz.
Sorry, we brought the English weather.
When I met Magyar last year in the pouring rain on his campaign across the country, he told me that some of Orban's policies would be staying.
The family policy, the tax policy, the fence at the southern border of Hungary against illegal migration.
So what can Magyar's victory teach not just Trump's opponents, but opponents of populist movements across Europe?
Change only happens if you vote for it.
The challenge for Democrats in the US is very different to the situation for established parties in Europe. Trump is in power, MAGA is the status quo, just like Orban was. Democrats are the challengers, just like Mr. Magyar. In most of Europe, it's populist parties, Reform in the UK, the National Rally in France, the AfD in Germany, who are offering change.
There is a real frustration among the public. This is not true only for Hungary. I think this is true for the whole democratic or so-called democratic world. People are frustrated, and I think they are experimenting.
To talk more about what the lessons are from Orban's defeat for Donald Trump, as well as lessons for populists and their opponents in Europe, joining me now is Anne Applebaum. She's a journalist, author, historian. She writes for The Atlantic magazine, but she's also written several books about Central and Eastern Europe. So, Anne, Donald Trump has just lost his best mate in Europe. How big a deal is that?
What was really important about Viktor Orban is that he created a model that people around Trump have wanted to follow for a long time. And this was the model. He was a democratically elected leader in a European country, a member of the European Union and NATO, who set out to alter his political system, to create what he himself called, this was his language, an illiberal democracy, to build a one-party state in which it would be very difficult, and I think he probably believed that it was impossible for anybody else to win. And this was very, very important for people around Trump. They understood that they needed to take over the bureaucracy, begin eliminating programs, seek to use the power of the state to take over media, seek to use the power of the presidency to influence business, all these things that seem kind of new and shocking in US politics. A lot of them are imported from Hungary, and people went to Hungary to understand how it was done. In losing, Orban demonstrates that that path to power is not forever.
For Orban, in the end, what really happened was the economy got terrible, people got tired of the corruption, seeing the inequality. Do you think Trump is already falling into that trap, or do you think Trump could learn from the mistakes of Orban?
What the Trump administration did inside the United States, leaving aside foreign policy, what it did inside the United States over the last year is much more extreme than anything Viktor Orban ever did. It went much faster. It involved the use of violence, for example, the use of the creation of a paramilitary force to run immigration policy. There's no equivalent of that in Hungary. The creation of DOJ, which was for a time a completely extra-legal body that was going through federal institutions and illegally firing people. This was much faster. It was much more brutal. It involved more violence. And actually, maybe for that reason, has created a bigger backlash. I mean, one of the things that Orban did really very, very well for a long time was he moved very slowly. He was very careful not to use violence. And really, the Trump administration hasn't followed those rules at all and has created has moved much further and much faster and much more extra legally or illegally. So Orban tried to do everything. I mean, he had the ability to change the Constitution, and so he would change the Constitution to suit himself. But the Trump administration has actually broken the law, and that's creating a much bigger and more complicated backlash.
Viktor Orban, as we say, created this illiberal democratic state over the last 16 years, but there were still small pockets of democracy. Is your concern there then when it comes to Donald Trump that the lesson he may take from Hungary is you don't let an inch of that democracy in? You make it as illiberal as possible?
Maybe. I mean, I don't read Donald Trump's mind, and so I don't know what lessons he's taking from Hungary, even if he's paying attention. You will see in the US over the next few weeks and months, I mean, actually, you've seen it already, you will see the federal government try to shape the outcome of the midterms. We saw for the first time in American history, we had pressure from the president on particular states to change their constituency borders in order to make them more favorable to the Republican Party. That happened in Texas. They've tried to make it happen in other states. That kind of, that's something very new in American politics. We've had gerrymandering before and people trying to fix boundaries before, but never on the orders of the national political party leaders. We've also seen the federal government has demanded from a number of states that they turn over their voter rolls. And the demand for voter rolls is perceived by almost all the state as something that's very sinister, that the administration will be looking to remove names or to make it harder for people to vote. Orban did a lot of that kind of stuff too. He also altered his electoral system to favor his party. And in the end, there was such a wave vote in the opposite direction that it didn't save him as it has saved him in elections in the past. And maybe that would also prove true in the United States. It's too early to say. But have people in the Trump administration learned the lesson that, they need to do what they can to prevent people from voting the wrong way. Yes, they have learned that lesson, and you can already see them seeking to apply it.
And so then when it comes to Europe, I mean, the big difference here between Hungary and America is that, you know, the populist, illiberal, whatever you want to call them, figure is in power right now. So they are the status quo. And as we saw in Hungary, people turned against it. Populists in Europe, a lot of them are not in power. They are still the change to the current situation. What are the lessons then for the anti-populists in Europe when it comes to this defeat for Orban?
You know, I think a lot of the problem in the politics of many countries today is that the people are still hooked up or still dragged down by old left-right divisions and by old party definitions that don't really reflect the most important political arguments now. It's really important that they begin to find the language that unifies people, that doesn't, that they aren't sucked into these often false existential culture wars, and the parties who see the danger in that need to unite now. You need to find the other issues that can move people, the economic issues, the issues of, connected to hope and democracy and rights and freedom, and begin to talk about those now and not wait for, decades of illiberalism to make people understand how important those things are.
And then just coming back to Hungary, I mean, Mr. Magyar sort of followed that playbook you sort of said quite well. I met him myself and he was very much like, look, I'm not left, right, liberal, conservative. I'm just focusing on the Hungarian people, on the economy, on the corruption, on bringing things back to normalcy. There is still a concern, though, that he is formerly of Fidesz. He is very anti-immigration himself. He now has a 2/3 majority to change the constitution. Is there any concerns there about what might happen to Hungary under him?
Well, first of all, I'd like to echo what some Hungarians have been saying in the last couple of days, which is, give us 4 to 8 hours to be happy. Before we worry about what bad things Péter Magyar might do, down the line and whatever terrible things are going to happen. Just give us just a few minutes. Look, I mean, I think he's described himself repeatedly as a center-right politician. The issue of immigration is a completely legitimate political issue that can be discussed in an adult way by parties of the center-right and center-left, and what a given country's policy towards migration should be is something that you should be able to talk about without hysteria. The problem with what Orban did was Orban weaponized it. He told Hungarians they were being invaded by foreigners under the orders of George Soros, who wanted to destroy the Hungarian nation and replace it with Muslims. And so that's the kind of politics we need to avoid getting into. My impression so far is that, from Magyar and the people around him, is that he intends to stick to that route. I mean, politics can be very disappointing, but I think I just feel it's too early to worry about that right now.
And so some critics and commentators are saying, this is a seismic blow to, well, we won't call it populism, illiberalism. Is it also too early to say that confidently, given that, there are still many pivotal elections coming up in Europe when it comes to these issues we've been talking about?
Of course, every election is different. You can't draw an exact lesson from Hungary and say, if we just follow what the Hungarian opposition did and do it in France or in Germany, then we win. I mean, no, of course it's not like that. But it is an important election to analyze. There will be ideas to be gained from looking at it. There will be ways of thinking to be learned from looking at it, even if there's no exact analogy.
Anne Applebaum, thank you so much for talking to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching this latest episode of FourSight. Big thank you, as always, to our contributors, this time Susanna, Andres and Anne. What do you think of this potentially seismic election result? Do you think Péter Magyar is going to herald big changes in Hungary? What do you think other populist leaders really make of it? And will people like Donald Trump actually learn the lessons, the ones that we've outlined here? Let us know, as always, in the comments, and make sure you subscribe to FourSight.